The year was 1912, a time when the world marveled at human ingenuity and technological advancements. The Industrial Revolution had paved the way for breathtaking inventions, and among these was a vessel that captured the imagination of an entire generation, the RMS Titanic. It was a ship of superlatives, the largest, the most luxurious, and, some believed, unsinkable. Built in the Harland and Wolff shipyards in Belfast, Ireland, the Titanic was the crown jewel of the White Star Line. Its creators envisioned it as not only a mode of transportation, but a floating palace that could ferry the wealthy and powerful across the Atlantic in unparalleled luxury. Every detail of the Titanic was crafted with precision and grandeur, from its opulent first-class staterooms to the grand staircase that became an icon of early 20th century luxury. The ship was divided into 3 classes, reflecting the rigid social structures of the time. In first class, the elite of society enjoyed lavish accommodations that rivaled the finest hotels on land. Here you would find the industrialists, business tycoons, and celebrities of the era sipping champagne in the elegant dining rooms or promenading along the ship's deck. People like John Jacob Astor IV, one of the wealthiest men in the world, and fashion icon Lady Duff Gordon walked the Titanic's halls, unaware of the fate that awaited them. Second-class passengers, though not as wealthy, were treated to fine dining and comfortable cabins, while third class, or steerage, was filled with hopeful immigrants, many of whom had sold everything they owned for a chance at a new life in America. For these passengers, the Titanic wasn't just a luxurious voyage. It was the vessel that carried their dreams of a better future. The ship's maiden voyage began with high hopes and great fanfare. On April 10, 1912, the Titanic set sail from Southampton, England, bound for New York. As it sailed through the cold waters of the North Atlantic, the mood on board was jubilant. The passengers and crew were confident in the ship's abilities, having placed their faith in the cutting-edge technology that made the Titanic so special. After all, its design featured a double bottom, and its hull was divided into 16 watertight compartments, a feature that led many to believe the ship was unsinkable. However, fate had other plans. As the Titanic sailed into the freezing waters of the North Atlantic, it received several ice warnings from nearby ships, but the ship's captain, Edward Smith, eager to make headlines by arriving in New York ahead of schedule, maintained a high speed. On the night of April 14, 1912, the ship's lookout, perched high in the crow's nest, spotted something ominous on the horizon, a massive iceberg looming in the dark. By the time the warning reached the bridge, it was too late. The ship was moving too fast to avoid a collision, and the iceberg scraped along the starboard side of the Titanic, breaching several of the watertight compartments. At first, the damage didn't seem catastrophic. Passengers, many of whom were asleep in their cabins, felt only a slight tremor. The ship's crew initially believed the situation was under control, but as the icy water began to pour into the lower decks, it became clear that the ship was in grave danger. The Titanic's designers had boasted that the ship could stay afloat even if 4 of its watertight compartments were flooded. Tragically, the iceberg had punctured 5. Panic began to spread, but not immediately. Many passengers, particularly those in first class, were initially reluctant to believe that the mighty Titanic could be sinking. They were, after all, on a ship that had been heralded as unsinkable. The luxury, the grandeur, the sheer size. It seemed impossible that this voyage could end in disaster. But within an hour of the collision, the bow of the Titanic was already dipping below the surface, and the ship's fate was sealed. One of the most tragic aspects of the Titanic disaster was the insufficient number of lifeboats. The ship, designed to carry more than 2,200 passengers and crew, had only 20 lifeboats, enough to accommodate just over half of those on board. Even worse, in the chaos that ensued, many lifeboats were launched half full. Lifeboat drills had been neglected, and the crew was ill-prepared to manage the evacuation. As a result, precious time was wasted, and many lives were lost that might have been saved. The ship's orchestra, led by band leader Wallace Hartley, famously continued to play as the lifeboats were lowered. Their music, meant to calm the passengers, became one of the enduring symbols of courage and grace in the face of catastrophe. Survivors later recalled that the band's final song was the hymn "Nearer, My God, to Thee," though some accounts differ on this detail. Regardless, the image of the musicians playing until the very end remains etched in history. As the situation grew increasingly dire, the class divide became starkly apparent. First-class passengers were given priority in the lifeboats, while many third-class passengers found themselves trapped below deck as the icy water filled the lower compartments. For the immigrants who had boarded the Titanic in search of a better life, the dream of America was slipping away before their eyes. By 2:20 a.m. on April 15, 1912, less than 3 hours after the iceberg had been spotted, the Titanic broke apart and disappeared beneath the waves. Over 1,500 people perished in the freezing waters of the North Atlantic, making it one of the deadliest maritime disasters in history. In the aftermath of the sinking, the world was left in shock. How could a ship so advanced, so well-engineered, and so seemingly invincible be lost so quickly? The sinking of the Titanic became a turning point in maritime history, leading to sweeping changes in safety regulations. The tragedy highlighted the need for sufficient lifeboats, proper training for crew members, and better communication between ships and shore. The Titanic disaster also exposed the stark realities of class and privilege in a way that resonated across the world. The fact that wealthier passengers had a higher chance of survival than those in steerage underscored the social inequalities of the time, igniting conversations about class, safety, and responsibility. In the years that followed, the Titanic remained a symbol of both human ambition and hubris. The ship was a marvel of its time, yet it was brought low by a combination of nature, overconfidence, and a failure to prepare for the worst. For decades, the wreck of the Titanic lay undisturbed at the bottom of the Atlantic, until it was finally discovered in 1985 by a team of explorers led by Robert Ballard. The discovery of the Titanic's resting place reignited public fascination with the disaster. New artifacts were brought to the surface, offering glimpses into the lives of the passengers and crew. Letters, personal belongings, and pieces of the ship itself became windows into a world that was forever changed on that fateful night in 1912. Hollywood would later immortalize the tragedy in the 1997 blockbuster film Titanic, directed by James Cameron. The film brought the story to a new generation, combining the historical events with a fictional love story that captivated audiences worldwide. The film's depiction of the disaster, with its attention to detail and emotional weight, became one of the most iconic representations of the event, further cementing the Titanic's place in popular culture. More than a century later, the sinking of the Titanic continues to capture the public's imagination. It is a story of human error, tragedy, and resilience, reminding us of both the fragility of life and the consequences of overconfidence. The Titanic, once a symbol of human achievement, now serves as a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the greatest technological marvels can be undone by the forces of nature. As we remember the passengers and crew who perished on that cold April night, we are reminded that history is not just a collection of dates and events. It is a tapestry of human stories, triumphs, and tragedies. The sinking of the Titanic remains one of the most poignant and enduring stories of the 20th century, a disaster that changed not only the way we think about safety at sea, but also the way we understand human ambition and its limits. And as the Titanic rests at the bottom of the Atlantic, her legacy continues to rise, shaping our understanding of the past and guiding us as we move forward into an uncertain future.